My name is Phoebe Marshall. I'm 29, and 3 weeks ago, at my sister's rehearsal dinner, my mother stood up in front of 40 people and said, "This is Phoebe. She's still figuring out what she wants to do with her life." My father raised his glass and said, "Some of us bloom late." The table laughed, except one woman. Lydia Hunter, my future brother-in-law's mother, looked down at my hand wrapped around my wine glass, and her face went still, completely still. Then she stood up and said, "Phoebe, walk with me." I didn't know why. I didn't know what she saw. But by the end of that walk, everything my parents thought they understood about me was wrong. If you want to know what happened, stay with me. Comment where you're watching from, and let's start at the beginning. I grew up in Mesa, in a house where my sister Yasmin's report cards got magnets on the fridge, and mine got filed in a drawer. Mom, Jody Marshall, ran the neighborhood HOA board like it was her personal court. Dad, Zachary, taught high school econ and measured every one of my choices against Yasmin's, out loud, at dinner. Yasmin got early acceptance. You're still figuring out community college. That was Dad's whole sentence. No follow-up. He didn't need one. I left home at 19 with $600 and a duffel bag, worked nights at a call center, days doing admin for a fire damage restoration company in Tempe. I learned the business from the inside, what insurance adjusters missed, what contractors padded, what buildings actually needed after they burned. At 23, with $22,000 saved, I bought out a failing two-man inspection outfit for $30,000 and my own name on the door, Marshall Structural Assessments. I told my parents I did insurance paperwork. True enough. They stopped asking. By 29, I had 31 employees, contracts across 3 counties, and a reputation that got me referred by word of mouth before I ever advertised. My family knew none of it. I didn't hide it from spite. I hid it because the second I told them, it would stop being mine. Yasmin got engaged to Jesse Hunter last spring. Old Scottsdale money. His mother, Lydia Hunter, built half the mixed-use developments north of Camelback Road. The rehearsal dinner was at a private club off Doubletree Ranch Road. White orchids, a string trio, 40 guests who all mattered to somebody. I sat at the table closest to the kitchen door. Mom stood to introduce the family. She got to me last. "This is Phoebe. She's still figuring out what she wants to do with her life." Dad laughed. "Some of us bloom late." The table did what tables do, a polite ripple, then it moved on. Lydia Hunter didn't laugh. She was looking at my left forearm, at the burn scar that runs from my wrist to my elbow, 3 years old, raised and shiny under the string lights. I saw her go pale. Then she set down her fork without a word to anyone at her table and said, "Phoebe, walk with me." I didn't move at first. My mother's smile cracked just slightly at the edges. I stood up anyway and followed Lydia Hunter out through the courtyard doors. She stopped under a string of patio lights, turned around and said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." She was staring at my arm like she'd seen a ghost. "Were you at the Alameda Street warehouse fire in Tempe 3 years ago in March?" My stomach dropped. Nobody outside the fire department had ever asked me that question.
"Yes," I said. "How do you know about that?" Lydia Hunter's hands were shaking. Actual, visible shaking, the kind you don't get to fake. She sat down hard on the low stone wall bordering the courtyard, like her legs had just stopped being something she could trust. "My husband, Warren, was inside that warehouse," she said. "He was doing a walkthrough before we bought the property, a pre-purchase inspection, nothing that was supposed to take more than 20 minutes. Nobody was supposed to be there that late in the evening. I remembered the night in pieces, the way you remember things that happened fast. March, 3 years ago. I'd been 2 buildings down doing an unrelated structural assessment for a different client, wrapping up, loading my equipment into my truck. I heard the alarm before I smelled anything. Then I smelled it. Then I heard someone coughing through a propped exterior door, the kind of cough that isn't clearing your throat, it's your body trying to keep functioning. I didn't think of it as brave. I want to be honest about that, because people always want the story to be about courage, and it wasn't. It was about knowing buildings. I'd spent 6 years learning how structures fail, how smoke moves, which walls hold and which collapse first. I knew that warehouse layout because I'd worked adjacent properties on that block before. I went in because I understood the space better than most people who'd be first on scene, and there wasn't time to wait for someone who didn't. I told Lydia the rest the way I tell hard things. Flat, in order, no performance, because performance was never the point. I found a man on the floor near a collapsed shelving unit, disoriented, not unconscious but close, the kind of consciousness that's already halfway somewhere else. The main exit was gone, flame already climbing the far wall, moving faster than it should have because of whatever was stored on that side. I got him upright. I got him moving toward a side window instead. I broke it with a fire extinguisher I'd grabbed off the wall on my way through, cleared the glass with my forearm because my hands were already full of him, and pushed him through before I followed.
That's where the scar came from. Not a dramatic moment, just glass and heat and doing the next necessary thing the way you do the next necessary thing when there isn't a version of events where you stand there and think about it. I didn't stay, I told her. The fire department was pulling up as I walked to my truck. I never gave a statement. I just left. Lydia put a hand over her mouth and held it there for a few seconds before she spoke again. Warren has talked about the woman who pulled him out of that building for 3 years. Every year on the anniversary, he brings it up like it happened yesterday. We hired an investigator 18 months ago. We had almost nothing. No name, no clear security footage. Just a partial angle from a neighboring lot that caught someone with a burn scar on her left forearm walking to a truck. She looked at me like I was something rearranging itself in front of her, piece by piece. It's been 3 years. We stopped actively looking 8 months ago. Warren still checks in with the investigator every few months anyway. He always asks if there's anything new. I didn't know what to do with that. I've spent my whole life being looked at with pity or dismissal or the specific tired disappointment my mother perfected over 3 decades. I had never once, not a single time, been searched for. Warren's at the dinner, Lydia said quietly. He's sitting at the head table right now, 3rd seat from Jesse. He doesn't know I stepped out. He doesn't know I found you. I looked past her, through the glass courtyard doors, at the party still moving inside without us. My mother was mid-laugh at something, hand on someone's arm. My father was topping off a stranger's wine glass with the easy confidence of a man who'd never once run out of the right thing to say. Yasmin was glowing next to Jesse, leaning into him, 26 years old, and completely certain the whole world was arranged in her favor, because so far, it always had been. Nobody had noticed either of us were gone. Nobody would have noticed if I never came back at all. That thought didn't hurt the way it used to. It just sat there, flat and true. I need you to come back inside with me right now, Lydia said, standing. He needs to see your face. My stomach tightened. I thought about walking back into that room, into my mother's carefully built evening, her orchids and her string trio and her 40 guests who all mattered to somebody, with Lydia Hunter's hand practically pulling me by the wrist. I thought about what it would look like. I thought about how fast my mother's face would change once she understood something was happening that she hadn't authorized. Part of me wanted to say no. 3 years of staying invisible is a hard habit to break in 30 seconds. But I thought about a man on a warehouse floor, disoriented, running out of time. I thought about the fact that somewhere in this building, he'd apparently spent 3 years wondering about a stranger. That felt like something worth finishing. "Okay," I said. We walked to the courtyard doors together. Lydia pushed them open, and the entire table went still.
The doors opened and 40 conversations didn't stop all at once. They stopped in a wave, table by table, the way a room quiets when it senses something before it understands what. My mother's head turned first, then my father's, then, slower, everyone else's. Warren Hunter was at the head table, third seat from Jesse, mid-sentence with a glass of wine halfway to his mouth. He was maybe 60, gray at the temples, the kind of solid build that comes from decades of physical work before the money arrived. Lydia walked straight toward him, and I followed 2 steps behind because I didn't know what else to do with my body in that moment. "Warren," Lydia said, and her voice cracked slightly on the second syllable. "I need you to look at her arm." He set the glass down without looking away from his wife's face. Something in her tone had already told him this wasn't a normal interruption. Then he turned toward me. I held my forearm up without being asked. The scar caught the string lights the way it always does, pale and raised, unmistakable if you know what you're looking for. Warren Hunter's face did something I've never seen a grown man's face do in real time. It didn't crumple exactly, it opened, like something that had been sealed shut for 3 years finally found a way to give. "You're the one who broke the window," he said, not a question. "Yes," I said. He stood up so fast his chair nearly went over. Jesse caught it behind him without looking, the reflexive move of someone used to his father's sudden motions. Warren crossed the space between us in 4 steps and just stood there for a second, like he didn't know if he was allowed to do what he wanted to do. Then he put both hands on my shoulders. "I have thought about you every single day for 3 years." His voice was rough. "I didn't know your name, I didn't know your face. I knew a scar and the sound of glass breaking, and I have thought about you every day." I didn't have a rehearsed response for this. I've spent my whole life being underestimated in rooms exactly like this one, and I had absolutely no framework for being thanked in one. "I'm glad you're okay," I said. It was the truest thing I had. Behind me, I heard my mother's chair scrape back. "Phoebe, what is going on?" Her voice had the particular brightness she used when she was trying to control a room that had stopped listening to her. "Warren, I'm so sorry. Whatever this is, I'm sure Phoebe didn't mean to." "Jody." Warren didn't raise his voice, but it cut through hers completely. "Your daughter saved my life." The words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. I watched my mother's face try to process a sentence that didn't fit anywhere in the file she'd kept on me for 29 years, still figuring out what she wants to do with her life. That sentence, from 20 minutes ago, was still hanging in the air, and now it was sitting directly next to this one, and they did not belong in the same room together. My father stood up slowly. "I'm sorry, saved your life how?" Warren turned to face the whole table, still gripping my shoulder like he needed the contact to stay steady. 3 years ago, I was pinned in a fire in a warehouse I was inspecting. A woman I never got the name of pulled me out through a broken window. My investigator spent 18 months trying to find her and came up with nothing. He looked at me. It was her. It was Phoebe. Yasmin's hand had gone to her mouth.
Jesse was staring at me like he was seeing a stranger sit down in his sister-in-law's chair. The whole head table had gone silent in the specific way people go silent when they suddenly suspect they've misjudged something badly. My mother's mouth opened. Nothing came out for a second. Then, "Phoebe never mentioned—" "Why would she?" Warren said, not unkindly, but not gently either. Nobody asked her anything worth mentioning it to. I felt something in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. It wasn't triumph. I want to be honest about that. It was closer to the feeling of a window finally opening in a room you'd stopped noticing was airless. Lydia touched my arm. She said quietly, just to me, while the table around us was still catching up to what had happened. "There's something else," she said quietly, just to me, while the table around us was still catching up to what had happened. "Something I haven't told Warren yet. Something I found out about your company 2 days ago when Jesse mentioned your name in passing, and I finally put it together." I looked at her. "What?" She glanced once at my mother, then back at me. "Marshall Structural Assessments did the post-fire inspection on that same property 8 months later for the insurance claim. Warren and I never connected the name because we never knew your name at all until tonight." She paused. "But I did some digging after Jesse mentioned you. Phoebe, you don't just run an inspection company. You've been quietly retained by 3 of the largest developers in this valley, including us, without either of us ever realizing it was you." The room was still loud with everyone else's confusion, but for me, in that moment, it went completely quiet. Lydia didn't say anything else at the table. She just looked at me and tilted her head toward a side hallway, away from the noise, away from my mother's rapid-fire questions that nobody was answering fast enough for her. I followed her into a small private room off the main hall, a place probably meant for the wedding party to regroup between events. String lights bled in faintly through the window blinds. She pulled out her phone, scrolled, and turned the screen toward me. It was an email chain, months old. The subject line read, "Camelback Corridor Redevelopment, Structural Due Diligence Phase 2. I recognized it instantly. It was one of our biggest contracts of the year, routed through a project management firm that handled the paperwork so our name rarely touched the client directly. That was normal. Half our commercial work came through intermediaries like that. "This is one of ours," Lydia said. "Hunter Development Group. Warren and I co-own it. Your firm has been our structural assessment partner for 14 months. I've read your reports. I've sat in meetings where our project leads used the word thorough like it was the highest compliment they had." She looked up at me. I never once connected Marshall Structural Assessments to a Phoebe. It's not exactly rare that a company name doesn't match a founder's name in my line of work. I had no reason to look twice. I felt my pulse pick up in a way it hadn't during the whole conversation with Warren. That had been about the past, about something that already happened, sealed and finished. This was different. This was the 2 halves of my life, the invisible half and the built half colliding in real time in a room 15 feet from my mother. 14 months, I repeated. 14 months, she said. And 2 weeks ago, our board approved moving forward on a 5-year expansion, new mixed-use developments across 3 states. We need a permanent structural partner for that whole pipeline, not project by project. I already had 2 firms on a shortlist. She paused. Yours wasn't one of them, because I had no idea your work and your name were the same thing in my line of work. She said it plainly, the way people say things when they've already made their mind and are just informing you of the outcome. That changes tonight. I didn't say anything for a second. I thought about the drawer at my parents' house where my school records used to get filed, unlike Yasmin's, which got magnets. I thought about 29 years of being someone's footnote, And now, a woman I'd met 40 minutes ago was telling me, matter-of-factly, that my actual life's work had been operating in rooms with her for over a year without her ever needing to know my face to trust it. "I want to set up a formal meeting," Lydia said. "Not tonight, not because of any of this." She gestured vaguely back toward the hall, toward Warren, toward the wreckage of my mother's evening. "Because your work has already earned it, whether or not I ever found out who you were." Before I could answer, the door opened. My mother stood in the frame, and for the first time in my life, I watched her search for a sentence and not immediately find one. "Phoebe," she said, "I think we need to talk." I looked at her for a long moment. 29 years of still figuring out what she wants to do with her life sat behind her eyes, and behind mine sat 14 months of contracts she'd never known existed, a warehouse fire she'd never asked about, and a scar she'd looked at for years without once wondering where it came from. "Not right now, Mom," I said. Her face did something I'd never seen it do. It didn't hold its composure the way it always had at every dinner, every gathering, every family event where she managed the room like a stage. It just slipped. "Please," she said, quieter than I'd ever heard her. I hesitated at the door. I stepped back into the hallway instead of the side room, and my mother followed me. Lydia stayed behind, quiet, giving us the space without making a show of leaving it. "Please," my mother said again, "just 5 minutes." I led her out to the courtyard where this whole night had started because it felt like the only honest place left to stand. The string lights were still on. The party noise was muffled behind glass now. "I don't know anything about your life, Mom," I said. "You haven't asked in years. Not what I do all day, not why I moved out at 19. Not once in 10 years have you asked me a real question about who I am." "I didn't think there was anything to ask," she said. Her voice wasn't defensive, it was smaller than that. "You never told us anything, Phoebe." "I told you I did insurance paperwork," I said. "That was true, it just wasn't the whole truth. And you never pushed past it, because you'd already decided what box I belonged in before I ever opened my mouth. Yasmin gets asked about her day, I get told I'm still figuring things out. I've been figuring things out since I was 19, Mom. I built a company with 31 employees while you were telling strangers I clean up paperwork." She didn't say anything for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had cracked open in a way I'd genuinely never heard. "I didn't know," she said. "I want to say I would have done things differently if I'd known, but I don't even know if that's true. I think I just stopped looking a long time ago. It was easier." I appreciated that she didn't pretend otherwise. My father never would have said that sentence out loud in 100 years. "I'm not interested in punishing you for it," I told her. "I'm just not going to pretend it didn't happen either. You don't get to find out I'm successful and suddenly want to know everything. That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" she asked, and for the first time in my life, she sounded like she genuinely didn't know the answer. "Slowly," I said, "if it works at all." She nodded, and I watched her absorb that as an actual answer instead of something to manage. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't going to be, not that night, maybe not for a long time. But it was the first true sentence that had passed between us in years, and that had to be worth something. 3 days later, I sat across a conference table with Lydia Hunter at Hunter Development Group's offices on Camelback Road. Warren was there too, quieter than the wedding, but present, watching the meeting with the specific attentiveness of a man who no longer took anything for granted. Lydia slid a folded term sheet across the table. 5-year structural partnership, 3 states. "It's not a favor," she said, before I could even ask. "Your renewal numbers over the last 14 months speak for themselves. I checked. 94% client retention on every project you've touched for us." I read it twice. Then I signed. Warren walked me to the elevator afterward. "For what it's worth," he said, "I don't think I ever properly thanked you, not the way it deserved." "I don't have to," I said. "You already did, at the dinner, in front of everyone who needed to hear it." He smiled at that, and I think he understood what I meant. My family and I are not fixed. I want to be honest about that, because these stories always want a clean ending, and mine isn't one. My mother has called twice since the dinner, real questions this time, about the company, about the fire, about the years she missed. I've answered some of them, not all. Healing isn't a single dinner undoing 30 years. It's a direction you choose to keep walking in, slowly, some days more than others. Yasmin and I had lunch last week. She asked me questions she'd never thought to ask before, and I watched her actually listen to the answers. My father hasn't called yet. I'm not waiting on it. I still have the scar, 2.5 inches, pale, running along my forearm. Most days I don't think about it at all. On the days I do, I don't need it to mean anything anymore. It's just part of the hand that built what I built, quietly, while everyone who was supposed to be paying attention wasn't.